Pele called football the beautiful game. Cruyff declared winning is an important thing. And Mourinho said, "If you have a Ferrari and I have a small car, to beat you in a race I have to break your wheel or put sugar in your tank." Let's forget about that last lunatic and focus more on the guy who said the second thing, Johan Cruyff, the leader of Total Football, the thoroughfare that explains the history of football tactics. This documentary hopes to explain the totality of total football. Sir William Temple said of the Dutch, "The envy of some, the fear of others, and the wonder of all their neighbours." He came out with that little nugget in 1673, exactly 300 years before Johan Cruyff encapsulated it perfectly. Before we get to him though, we've got to send ourselves back 100 years to a boggy pitch on Hamilton Crescent in Partick, where Scotland and England played the first ever international game of football. There were no goals, but the event was marked as a success, particularly for the Scots, entirely made up from the Queen's Park team who played the sport with passes as opposed to English dribbling. Football would never be the same again. Let's smash out a quick history lesson. Bob McCall takes this Queen's Park passing game to Newcastle in 1901. There, Peter McWilliam learned how to play it, bagged it up and went down south to London, where he utilised it at Tottenham Hotspur in 1912. Around the same time, coaches from either side of the northern border, John Tate Robertson and Jimmy Hogan, decided to fuck off away from an island that didn't care much to remember them. They spread the passing game over the continent, and thanks to them, we have the beautiful version of the beautiful game sprouting up in places like Austria, Hungary, Italy, and even further afield in South America. From one dusty game of November football in the 1870s, we have snowballed into the mid-20th century delights of Mathis Sindelar and the Austrian Wunderteam, as well as Herbert Chapman and his WM at Arsenal in the 1930s. Dynamo Moscow's Pasavochka, River Plate's La Machina, and Erno Erbstein's Il Grande Torino of the 40s, Hungary's magical Magyars and Arthur Rowe's kick and rush Spurs of the 50s, followed by Brazil's magical World Cup winners in 58 and 62. All influential, all successful, but none of them totally total football. In each of those there's varying degrees of passing and moving, of pressing, of coordination for sure. Total football though was a completely different sport. Players had previously interchanged positions, mainly horizontally or mainly to drop into a new formation. Total football demanded free movement of players anywhere, horizontally across the pitch, vertically up the pitch, but crucially not vertically up into the sky. Jetpacks weren't knocking about yet. The key being, if a defender fancied himself as an attacker, your original attacker and midfielder best drop back to maintain the formation. Pressing had been seen before, but not to such a degree of paramount importance that it inferred the rest of the system. Press the opposition goalkeeper and both the midfield and defence had to push up too, making an offside trap a naturally occurring tool. This made space the most important thing on the pitch. Their defensive half of the pitch was rendered unplayable because of the ludicrously high offside trap, their attacking half of the pitch stretched as big as possible. What better country to be at the forefront of such spatial ingenuity than one in a constant battle with the North Sea? The Netherlands. In 1955, Albert Camus wrote that Amsterdam was boring. He said, "For centuries pipe smokers have been watching the same rain on the same canal." I would say little did he know when it comes to football being professionalised in Netherlands the prior year of that quote, but he was famous for being quite a good goalkeeper, so we Camus probably kept in the loop. But little did he know what effect this infinitesimal event would have on Amsterdam and Netherlands as a whole. The Dutch's late arrival to professionalisation was key to such a massive tactical revolution. When most coaching minds had contorted themselves to the WM for decades and some plotted the next evolution to the 4-2-4, the Dutch simply slipped from their archaic and by now kamikaze 2-3-5 into the 4-2-4. It meant Dutch minds were more malleable to how the sport could and should be played. 65 years previous, football arrived in the Netherlands, and at the dawn of the 20th century, Ajax were formed. 10 years into that existence, they began a trend when Jack Kerwin of County Wicklow in Ireland became their first professional foreign manager, and this would become the norm. 5 years later, they hired Jack Reynolds, a Manchester City reject who sought refuge in the Netherlands during World War I. Across the next 3 decades, he'd spent 25 years in charge of the club in various spells. A disciplinarian and worker of a 16-hour day, Reynolds peddled attack is the best form of defence football, and there, Ajax's mantra was born. He began setting up the youth team in the same methods as the senior team to breed a style of play throughout the club. He was actually the first to coach Ajax to their first unbeaten league season, a full 76 years before Louis van Gaal could do the same. He oversaw the building of a new stadium, De Meer, in 1934, slap bang in the middle of an Ajax golden age. But by 1959, they were just another team, until they hired Vic Buckingham. It had been 12 years since Jack Reynolds had been in charge, and the club had won just 1 league title in that time. The thread in what must have felt like a chasm between the eras of Reynolds and Buckingham was Janny van der Veen. A youth coach at Ajax, it was he who Johan Cruyff credited with his development during the late 50s and early 60s. The likes of Piet Keizer, Johan Neeskens and Ruud Krol all benefited from his work too. They will be passed on to Vic Buckingham as the spine of a new team. First off, Buckingham had some success to achieve, and he did so almost instantly. He deployed the kind of system that he had played in under Joe Hume and Arthur Rowe at Tottenham Hotspur. His fluid WM, borrowed from those great minds, won the league in his first season and the KMVB Cup the campaign after, before he fled mysteriously into the night. The groundwork had been done. The foundations now needed to be laid so Amsterdam could adequately swagger into the swinging 60s. Rinus Michels was a footballer of acceptable standard, playing his entire career at Ajax. He'd helped raise those standards considerably in the Dutch capital. He'd been a player when Jack Reynolds returned to coach Ajax in 1945, but like barges in the night on an Amsterdam canal, he and Vic Buckingham had passed by one another unknowingly. Michels retired in 1958, a year before the Englishman took charge of the club. Being a strict professional, Michels furthered his managerial persona after retirement by teaching gymnastics at local schools and coaching amateur football clubs on the side. 7 years after he retired as a player, Michels landed the Ajax job. Probably seems like some astonishing meteoric rise, but Ajax were dogshit at the time, so it wasn't. Michels was tasked midway through the 1964-65 season to keep them safe from relegation. He did so by the proverbial skin of their teeth before embarking on an enormous tactical change. Michels had experience, sure. 4 years at JOS and a year at AFC, Dutch clubs that you're probably thinking I made up. That experience was enough for Ajax to work on, and certainly his former life as a player for the club counted towards his appointment. Before anybody was busy uttering the phrase total football like sheeps in the wind, Michels conformed to the tactical norm of the day, 4-2-4. Under his watch, the physical conditioning of the team shot through the roof, underscored with his first ultimatum to his players. We are going to make Ajax more professional. If anyone is not with me in wanting more discipline and training, say so now, then you can leave. With that, he woke Ajax up from their slumber. Just as Vic Buckingham had done earlier in the decade, Rinus Michels took the club by the scruff of its neck and catapulted it towards the title in his first season. Led by 21-year-old Piet Keizer, it was another homegrown hero who was working his way through the ranks, a player that would come to define the club. Johan Cruyff got his start in the Ajax senior team in 1964 as a fresh-faced teenager against FC Groningen. By the championship-winning campaign of 1965-66, he was fully integrated into the front line alongside his hero, Keizer. Pythagoras in boots himself did the calculations, and 7 points ahead of their nearest challenger, and doing so with an attacking style, Ajax could now finally reassert themselves as the best team in Amsterdam again. Their tag as the best Dutch team in football was reaffirmed shortly after in the European Cup. They had lost 3 of their previous 4 ties in European competition, the start, middle and end of Ajax's history on the continent. That would change in 1966 when they welcomed Liverpool to their European Cup home of the Olympisch Stadion in their last 16. 5-1 was the obliteration on that foggy December evening, a scoreline that Bill Shankly insinuated could be overturned at Anfield. When Cruyff bagged himself a brace in front of the Kop in the second leg, Europe took notice. Until Dukla Prague eliminated them in the next round, but that bit's not so important. Wind in his sails, Michels constructed his first true Ajax team from the back. Velibor Vesovic, a former European Cup finalist with Partizan Belgrade, was deployed as the libero. Youngsters Barry Hulshoff and Wim Serbia joined him in the back line, whilst the exuberance of youth continued through Cruyff and Kaiser, who joined Jack Swart, Henk Groot and Klaas Nuninga up front. Ajax would go on to win the title all but one time between 1966 and 1970. Ajax slammed in 122 goals, destroying the league in 67, with Cruyff bagging 34 of those for a ratio of over 1 per game. That double winning season wasn't to be replicated the following year thanks to Den Haag, no not that one, whilst the great Real Madrid had dumped them out of the European Cup's first hurdle. OK, Ajax took the record winners to extra time, but it was pretty obvious that a lack of experience cost them big time. The more they'd be subjected to those lessons though, the less of a viable excuse they could glean from it. The 1968-69 season was arguably the most successful of them all, despite the fact that when they came up for air in the summer of 69, they no longer had silverware to show for it. Feyenoord had pipped them in both League and Cup, despite the additions of Arie Haan and Ruud Krol from the youth team and Jerry Muren from Volendam. The more the season wound on, the more the focus was entirely on Europe. It proved Michels and Ajax's final frontier. The deeper and deeper Ajax delved into Europe, the more Michels began to tinker with the idea of the 4-3-3, yet still heartache presided over their continental campaign. An incredible 3-1 display away at former European champions Benfica earned them a third tie on neutral footing, a performance of arguably greater significance than their 5-1 demolition of Liverpool 3 years prior. It certainly helped them to progress to a round that they had never reached before, and via Spartak Trnava to the promised land of the European Cup final. Two ideologies smashed together at the Bernabeu on that balmy May evening when the godfather of Catenaccio, Nerio Rocco, took apart Michels' flamboyant form of the game on the counter. Again and again, Milan struck Ajax in a damning 4-1 victory that had the Dutch side licking their wounds. And because of their inadequacies back home, they couldn't even hit back immediately. Instead, they were defeated 3-0 at Highbury by Arsenal in the semi-finals of their one and only Fairs Cup campaign. Meanwhile, Ernst Happel won the European Cup by playing a 4-3-3 when his Feyenoord team dispatched a favourite Celtic to become the first Dutch outfit to win the competition. By now, it was evident that Rinus Michels had to be even more ruthless to squeeze that extra % out of his team. They'd won the double in 1970 but were starving for more. Ahead of the 70-71 season, Johan Neeskens joined the revolving cast of players centrally as Ajax's fluidity reached new heights. At the back, the likes of Serbia and Neeskens were crucial in stifling opponents, whilst Jerry Muren soared to new heights in midfield and Cruyff, Kaiser and Swart were bordering on unstoppable. The season was the pinnacle of Rinus Michels' Ajax. It was a campaign in which Johan Cruyff won European Player of the Year and the club gained all kinds of plaudits, but the season began disastrously. Cruyff himself wouldn't feature regularly until November. He returned having lost his number 9 shirt, so he blindly dug his hand into a pile for his replacement jersey. Out came number 14, and the rest was history. With that number he became a different player, almost a different person. to the extent that he told Rinus Michels in no uncertain terms that he would never ever be substituted again after he was protected against Atletico Madrid in the semi-final of that year's European Cup. To get there, Ajax had beaten another former champion in the shape of Celtic 3-0, another landmark on their way to immortality, as was Cruyff's ascension to not only team leader, but apparently club leader. People are usually agreed on Michels' success had been a bit of a walkover, but it was Michels himself who Cruyff squared up to. He told his coach that he wouldn't ever do that to him again, and Michels rolled over and had his belly tickled by his most important player. And now, this was Cruyff's team. It didn't really matter all that much that Feyenoord had won back the Eredivisie. Ajax had hoovered up enough Dutch honours by this stage. It was Europe where it now mattered, and by overturning Atletico's first leg advantage in the semi-final with 2 late goals, they booked another final, this time against Panathinaikos. They would have to do so without Ruud Krol, who had broken his leg, but in such a team environment they could afford to lose almost anybody and still perform to a high standard. In the opposite Wembley dugout to Michels, fittingly for all kinds of reasons, was Ferenc Puskás. The Hungarian told his players pre-match, "Cruyff is 50% of the team, let us handle him and we'll win the cup." They did not handle him. Dick van Dijk, no not that one, stooped in with a header on 5 minutes and Ajax immediately took to killing the game off with possession of the football. Not since 1953, when Puskás was on the other side of the white line, had Wembley seen such a controlling display. Just to rubber stamp the occasion, Ajax thought they might as well grab a second goal, so Ari Han did so 3 minutes from time. Ajax were European champions. Rinus Michels had no more worlds left to conquer. Of his manager, Ari Han stated, "Michels taught us discipline and structure of the game, something that was missing until then in the team." With the foundation firm, Ajax could now prepare to scale their peak. For mortals, after winning the European Cup, the only place is down. For even the greats, after your manager leaves after that European Cup triumph, the only place is down. For the greatest, it is just the beginning. 15 names were written on Ajax's shortlist to replace Rinus Michels. They went for the cheapest when they hired little-known Romanian Stefan Kovacs, whose application could be compared to some kid playing Football Manager and applying for real jobs for clicks on YouTube. Except Ajax took the bait and they never played so well. When Dutch footballers were seen as amateur and malleable in the 50s and 60s, those footballers had now matured in the 70s and set about taking their new coach to task. Kovacs was drilled thoroughly by his players as they tested his control both on and off the pitch. The Romanian survived those tests. A Michels signing in Horst Blankenberg was promoted to the starting lineup in place of the departing Vasovic. Ruud Krol maintained his place as a team's defensive leader, akin to a Bobby Moore or a Franz Beckenbauer. Krol alongside Wim Serbia on the other side of defence would be the backbone of this team, thanks to their energy out wide. Another new player was Arnold Muren, predictably Jerry Muren's brother, whilst youngster Johnny Rep continued to make strides into the first team from the academy. It was only natural that Ajax took a while to re-enter the Michels groove, but when they did, they outshone anything Michels ever allowed them to do on the pitch. The 1971-72 season can be comfortably characterised as the best Ajax had ever been before, or have been since. Yeah, you heard me, Louis van Gaal. They got revenge over Ajax in the European Cup quarter-final for their Fairs Cup embarrassment 2 years prior. This wasn't an Ajax smarting off the back of their first European Cup final loss. This was an Ajax more mature for those defeats, and now they were something Arsenal still aren't to this day, European champions. 2 years was a long time in football. Some things did stay the same though, and that was Ajax beating Benfica yet again, with the match balanced on a Jack Swart knife edge. The forwards stopped the game from going beyond the 2 legs with a first leg winner. With that final confirmed against Inter, the KNVB Cup was practically theirs after a 5-1 humiliation of their nearest rivals Feyenoord. The Rotterdam outfit couldn't keep up in the league either, as Ajax lost just once, won 30 of their 34 matches and claimed the title with 3 games to spare. The only team that could stop them, Go Ahead Eagles, who were the only thing constituting a bogey team for Ajax around this time. All this, a probable treble as Ajax went into the back and retrieved what is now a well-worn Dutch footballing trope: infighting. Yes, some members of the board with the club a handful of games away from a fucking treble wanted Stefan Kovacs gone. The players stopped it from happening, proving that Kovacs couldn't even grow a backbone for his own job as the club head towards Rotterdam, the perfect climaxing scene for a momentous treble. If by 1972 it was needed any longer, the European Cup final between Ajax and Inter was as clear as a footballing watershed as you can get. Italian Catenaccio was out, Dutch Total Football was in. Ajax finally got their Milanese revenge with 2 Johan Cruyff goals. Changes were made that summer as Kovacs clung on to what little power he had left as the head coach. Van Dijk and Swartz were phased out for Johnny Rep and Arnold Muren as the players continued in their nirvana. This time though there was no treble, thanks NAC Breda in the KMVB Cup second round penalty shootout, but Ajax won another 30 league games to pinch their league crown from Feyenoord again, this time by just 2 points. They had trophies galore by the time the season's finale swung around. The Intercontinental Cup was as bruising as ever, but won against Independiente. The first Super Cup would have officially been Ajax's too, had Rangers not been banned from UEFA competition as reigning Cup Winners' Cup champions. Whilst the honours and the overall package denoted that 1972 was Ajax's peak, they saved their best performance for the year after. Their 4-0 quarter-final evisceration of a Bayern Munich in the European Cup is the greatest performance of Ajax's history. Maybe it's the greatest singular best performance by a football team in international competition since Hungary's demolitions over England. Oh, and if anyone ever tells you that Germany and Bayern played a form of total football, go and show them this game and they'll realise what silly versts they have been. Triumph over Real Madrid in the semi-final came with a little more discomfort, but the control they exacted in a 1-0 second leg victory in the Bernabeu showed the chasm of difference since Real had dominated Europe. It was a very long time ago from those first 5 trophies, and even their own elimination of Ajax in 1967. Juventus in the final saw a very much role reversal of the 1969 final, where the Dutch had been cast as the naive youngster, and the Italian had played the part of Europe's kings. Plain to type, Ajax ruled the match with an iron fist in one of the more cold and calculated performances in European Cup final history amidst sweltering Belgrade heat. This was everything the Netherlands hoped their World Cup coronation against West Germany would be the following summer. They got their early goal courtesy of Johnny Rep, and then they passed their Italian foes to pieces, safe in the knowledge that they didn't even need the second strike. In a European Cup final, it's jarring to see one team simply settling to lose by just 1 goal, but that's exactly what Juve did. Of the mood after the final, Barry Hulshoff said, "Deep down, we knew it was over." Stefan Kovacs' time had been coming since the board dared to sack him weeks out from the treble. He probably realised that, as head coach, the real manager of Ajax wore number 14 out there on the pitch in front of him. He didn't have Ajax on a mental leash as Michels did, but gave his players just about enough rope to feel free. His successor, George Noble, was given so much rope that he could hang himself. A small-town manager who presided over the end of Ajax's dominance in Europe and spent a small amount of time as coach. In that time, Ajax imploded. He allowed the players to vote in a new captain, which saw Johan Cruyff overthrown. He instantly kicked his toys out of the pram and chartered a transfer to Barcelona. Reuniting with Rinus Michels, Cruyff helped end Barcelona's 14 years without a league title in his very first season. Meanwhile, Ajax burned through 5 managers in 3 years and wouldn't return to their European pomp for 2 decades. So, whose fault was it anyway? Who do we have to blame for total football? Johan Cruyff will always be pedestaled as the poster boy for total football, but he was shepherded by the minds such as Rinus Michels, who was only upheld in Amsterdam by the great work of Jack Reynolds and Vic Buckingham, who helped transform Ajax before him. They took a little from British coaches who left their own forgetful isles and into the continent where they would be more renowned and more important. The ones who birthed the passing and the moving, Austria's Wunder team, the magical Magyars, Nil Grande Torino, and further afield to River Plate's Machine and Brazil's Joga Bonito. But nobody ever did total football until Ajax. Cruyff needed Michels just as Michels needed Cruyff. The foundations had been worked upon before Michels delivered success, and Stefan Kovacs unshackled an incredible beauty that had never before been seen on a football pitch. The Romanian just about weak enough to allow Cruyff to control the pitch, but crucially not so weak that the entire system would collapse. Kovacs remains underappreciated in his homeland, as a local poll placed him fourth in a list of Romanian football coaches. Without all this, Cruyff would have otherwise outgrown Ajax and Dutch football to create something similar out on his own. The 1970s was pure innovation, across wider society and true of football as well. Whilst Rinus Michels and Johan Cruyff were creating total football in the West, Valery Lobanovsky was behind that iron curtain in modern-day Ukraine doing something similar with Dynamo Kyiv. Here, the family tree of football tactics branches down two avenues, one of Cruyff and Louis van Gaal, as much as they might have despised one another, as well as Marcelo Bielsa and Pep Guardiola. The other branch of Lobanovsky, Arrigo Sacchi, and to the Stuttgart school of modern German football managers, from Ralf Rangnick and Jurgen Klopp to Thomas Tuchel and Julian Nagelsmann. Why, for the past decade, the Premier League has become the undisputed best league in the world isn't for its quality of players or its overabundance of money. It is because these two tactical philosophies have become melded into one through the battles of Guardiola and Klopp, of Man City and Liverpool. We started with 3 quotes. It's only fair that we complete what Johan Cruyff said. He did say winning is an important thing, but he also ended it with the following: "But to have your own style, to have people copy you, to admire you, that is the greatest gift." And total football certainly did that. Just joining us as a new subscriber, what the fuck are you waiting for? We're 3 issues in. Go check out our first 2 issues here.